La stjernene få dysse deg i søvn. Hold av en plass til meg i din drøm. Og vær da ikke redd mens du sover, for natten skader ingen, og jeg lover. Jeg vil våke ved din side og vokte deg i natt. Og senere, når dine øyne åpnes, og dagen skjenker av sitt lys til deg, vær da ikke redd mens du våker, for dagen er din venn, og jeg lover, når den er over, vil jeg våke ved din side og vokte deg igjen. Hi, welcome to our third part of the reading of chapter 2 out of the Red Lion by Maria Schepers. And we are still following our protagonist Hans Burgner in his first incarnation in this tale, the one that sets the stage for everything that is to follow throughout this whole book. And particularly, I think, in the last part, we started to see how his intense desire for the divine substance, as he calls it, the red lion, the secret of the alchemist, is blinding him to the warnings of the teacher. The teacher sees at least some of the danger signs for Hans, and Hans cannot even hear it because he wants this thing, despite him not being ready for the consequences as outlined by his teacher. So let's keep following him here and see what you think. One afternoon, we sat in the Amadeus Bahr. Though it was still comparatively early, the rain-bearing autumn clouds made it dark as evening. Rochard was surrounded by a large crowd of noisy students who bore all the marks of their strenuous nightlife. I withdrew from them and went to the fire, where I began to study a book my master had borrowed from Amadeus Bahr. The only light was a floating wick hung from a sooty beam, and I had to stop reading for my eyes began to hurt. I began to watch Rochard again, stealthily. As always, he was the focal point of all my thoughts. There he was, calm and sober, sitting in the middle of that drunken crowd whose hot breath smelled of sour wine. But I was the only person who perceived him this way. To the students, he was a companionable tale-teller whose every word brought laughter. Now he was telling them a story about a well-known woman of the city who would give herself to any man who could cover every part of her body with gold coins. Once she lured in a tattered old alchemist. She could sense the smell of gold about him. She fed him sumptuously and then led him into the bedroom, disrobed in front of him, and stretched out on the bed, placing large chunks of lead on her soft white body. Then she challenged the old man to turn them into gold if he would have her. The poor old fellow did the best he could, but he was so inflamed with desire that the precious red powder slipped through his fingers at the wrong time. Instead of turning the lead to gold, he had made gold of those parts of the woman's body which were valuable only as flesh and blood. This story aroused the students greatly, though they tried to conceal their feelings by laughing. One of them started to sing, but his hoarse voice faltered and choked frequently from drunkenness. The many contradictions in Rochard's personality did not bother me anymore, for I understood that a sage can hide only behind a shield of foolishness. This was why he acted the charlatan. Suddenly, the water in the iron cauldron over the fire began to boil and hiss over the sides. An old woman came up with a bowl full of big dumplings, which she began to roll in her clawed hands before throwing them into the steaming water. As if this were a signal, Rochard got up and came to where I was sitting. "Let's go," he said curtly. I rose and followed him. Heavy, cold rain was beating down on the narrow streets, so we hurried. We moved with long strides across the market square, along the city wall, and into the dressmaker's street, where we found the tailor's house in which Amadeus Bahr was now living. Even his modest adobe house had been needed for the swarm of servants who had accompanied the Count's guests. We were both soaked to the skin by the time we knocked at the door. The little man cleared his throat and called, "Come in." We entered the windowless little room Bahr had rented. There was a rancid smell from the tallow candle that burned almost constantly, and the whole room stank of onions. Bahr turned toward us. He was emaciated, and his clever black eyes shone from slack, wrinkled lids, but he smiled at us cheerfully. "You've come just at the right time, Anselmus. I'm engaged in struggling with your famous Tabula Smaragdina." "A divine pastime," Rochard replied, shaking water from his cloak. He cautiously pushed aside a large pile of books and papers and sat down on the squeaky bed. "What wretched weather! Are you soaked, Hans?" "To the bone," I replied, shivering. I moved closer to the small iron stove, feeling elated. Rochard couldn't send me home in this heavy downpour. I found a seat on a wooden chest by the stove, well out of range of the candlelight. Here I sat patiently, like a wild beast awaiting his prey. "His Grace wants me to give him the exact meaning of the emerald tablet. He wants to serve it to his guests as a dessert after the larded bear shank." Bahr was really a secret rebel. His weak body, menial position, and great mental ability had combined to make him miserable, awkward, and haughty all at once. Thus he took note of all the ridiculous, cruel, and stupid things at his master's court with the black daggers of those sharp eyes. He frequently wrote scathing pamphlets with irresistibly humorous and recognizable characterizations. These works were carefully hidden in his wooden chest. He knew that even one of them could send him to the torture rack in the pagan tower if it got into the wrong hands. But he could not give up writing them. They were the only satisfaction in his miserable life. "This isn't a difficult assignment, Amadeus," Rochard said with a smile. "There are already a number of confusing interpretations of the emerald tablet in circulation. The worst you can do is add one more. The important thing is to make it exciting enough to help the digestions of the nobility. I suppose I'll have to shove in a lot of sex for that and then soothe them with a bunch of lies about how they'll still go to heaven after their no-good, stupid lives. The two of them laughed, but Bahr's laughter turned to a choking, barking cough that shook his whole body and brought tears to his eyes. Rochard looked at him with concern. When the attack had subsided, he spoke. "And have you found anything to amuse the guests suitably?" "No," Bahr replied grumpily. "What really irritates me, though, is that I can't find a single sentence in it that makes sense. I suspect it is one of the greatest frauds in human history. A fraud of genius, of course, since both the intelligent and the stupid have been fascinated by it for centuries." Rochard nodded wisely. "That is certainly one explanation of the Emerald Tablet," he replied, his lips twitching with that curious smile that even seemed to provoke Bahr. "I am surprised, though, to find you among the spiritually feeble, Amadeus. Are you trying to save your sense of superiority by refuting something just because you don't understand it?" "Of course not. You are wrong." Bahr jumped nevertheless, his face livid. "But for Christ's sake, are you telling me you understand this Dodonian hocus-pocus?" "Understand it? No, I wouldn't say that. I have not yet fully grasped its meaning on all three levels, but I do know that it contains every solution to the problems of the body, soul, and afterlife of man." For a few moments, Bahr stared at him silently. Then he spoke almost with humility. "The seeker who does not want to hoard the blessings of learning for himself cannot afford to have prejudices. Knowledge is more important to me than this sick body or the drudgery of having to serve those fools up there, or even my pride. Please, tell me about the tablet." "I'll be glad to," Rochard replied. "What do you already know about it? I don't want to be repetitious." "I don't know very much," Bahr admitted. "I know it was written by Hermes Trismegistus, whose tomb Alexander the Great found during one of his campaigns. His Greek name was first mentioned about the 4th century after Christ, but his figure was undoubtedly surrounded by religious legends long before that. During the Roman Empire, the Egyptians erected obelisks in his memory, and they always covered these obelisks with engraved alchemical formulae. Some people think that Hermes Trismegistus is simply the Greek name for the Egyptian pharaoh Thoth, or Thut, who is mentioned several times by Plato," he continued. "According to Plato, Thoth lived several millennia before Christ and founded and encouraged numerous sciences and arts. He is credited, among other things, with inventing arithmetic, astronomy, and the game of dice. The Egyptians even believe it was he who made the distinction between vowels and consonants. Of course, some people believe that the name Thoth refers to the embodiment of a concept rather than a person. The ancient Egyptians had a god named Thoth who represented wisdom, skill, and swiftness, and they pictured him with a caduceus just like the Greek Hermes. That's as far as I've gotten in finding out about Hermes Thoth." "Getting that much was a nice accomplishment, Amadeus," Rochard said approvingly. "The most charitable thing that can be said about the documents concerning Hermes Trismegistus is that they are ciphers, understood only by initiates. And don't think I'm being arrogant when I use the word initiate. Every initiate has had to go through hard, physical exertions, equally difficult tests of will, and unceasing spiritual effort. The use of esoteric terms is not just a greedy device to conceal material pleasures that anyone might enjoy. Anyone who wants to enjoy these treasures must laboriously work his way to the summit where the temple of knowledge stands open." I dared not stir for fear they would notice me. I simply sat on the chest, numb in my steaming clothes. I understood the words Rochard was using, but I only became aware of their true meaning after much time and suffering. Rochard went on. Hermes Thoth was unquestionably an Egyptian priest, physician, and astronomer. Rochard continued. His actual dates have not been established, but they are probably earlier than Plato's estimate. It is also possible that he was the pharaoh as well as a priest. The ancient world didn't separate these two functions. At one time, the pharaoh was the man of highest intellect in the nation, quite a different figure from the bloodthirsty tyrants of later times. He had to be an initiate because, according to the ancients, only he who ruled himself and his own spirit was fit to rule others. Hermes is a title like man or Buddha, but it has a threefold meaning. It can mean a man, a caste, or a god. The man Hermes was the first great initiate, but his name also refers to the entire priestly caste. Referring to a god, the name means the planet Mercury, the spiritual sphere where divine initiates live. In fact, Mercury is the leader of divine initiation in the regions beyond Earth. The Greeks, who studied the Egyptian religion, called the person who largely originated it Hermes Trismegistus, the threefold master of all natural sciences. Many thousands of works are ascribed to him. Most of them were written by his disciples and adherents. The most profound and the most authentic is the Emerald Tablet. If you have it by you, Amadeus, please read it aloud. Bahr leaned over the large open book, and his knotty finger traced the beginning of the Emerald Tablet. Verum sine mendatio certum et verissimum. And let me add a reader's note here. We have a full page of the Emerald Tablet in Latin. And since I'm most likely going to slaughter it, I will skip over to the English translation. English translation of the Emerald Tablet. The truth without lying, certain and truest. Inferior things are like superior things, and superior things are like inferior things, to perpetuate the miracles of the one thing. And just as all things came about through the meditation of the one, so all things were born from this one, by adaptation. Its father was the sun, and its mother the moon. It was carried in the womb of the wind and nourished by the earth. It is the father of all good things on earth. Its power would remain whole, even though it were directed against the whole earth. Thou shalt separate earth from fire, the subtle from the simple, gently and ingeniously. It ascends from earth to heaven and descends to earth again, and receives the vital force of both planes. Thus thou shalt have the glory of the whole creation. Therefore all darkness will flee from thee. This is the strength of all strengths that conquers all subtle things, and sees through that which is solid. And thus the world was created. From this there were marvelous adaptations, and this is the method of them. And so I am called Hermes Trismegistus, for I have the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. I have told everything about the work of the sun. End of the Emerald Tablet. Bahr sat looking expectantly at Rochard, his aquiline profile outlined on the wall by the flickering candles. There are 3 levels of meaning to the Tabula Smaragdina, just as there are usually 3 meanings to each Egyptian hieroglyph, Rochard told him. There is a physical, an astral, and a mental meaning. The revelation of Hermes Trismegistus contains the most profound secrets of creation, and the forces which created this world and the astral regions. But the tabula is also alchemy in the strictest sense of the word, the very essence of it. It contains the spiritual recipe for the great elixir of life, the aurum potabilis that can heal sickness, rejuvenate, cleanse the blood, and revitalize the body fluids. I ought to mention that this so-called potable gold doesn't make people immortal, as ignorant fanatics believe. It simply lengthens the lifespan by eliminating aging. The Tabula Smaragdina also deals with the other more esoteric goal of alchemy, Rochard continued, the transmutation of metals. Now you can understand why Trismegistus hid his meaning in a complicated labyrinth. The young priest who sought the deep mysteries of the Egyptian religion had to undergo difficult tests before each new concept was unveiled to him. The more he learned, the more severe the tests became, and he had to suffer physical death before he received the full illumination of the ultimate secret. Trismegistus constructed the Tabula Smaragdina so that it not only reveals but conceals its essence from the spiritually inferior. Truth gives strength to the strong, you know, but it wounds the weak, just like a carelessly handled sword. That makes the Emerald Tablet fascinating, not only for its content, but for its structure. It in itself is the test that polishes the spirit, that overcomes it to maturity and makes it capable of understanding the conclusion. Another basic tenet of Trismegistus' philosophy is that only he who can transmute himself on the physical, astral, and mental planes can bring about the great magisterium, Rochard concluded. "Tell me what the thing means," Bahr broke out. "You have led me to the mountaintop, and now you cover my eyes." "Next, visit Amadeus. It is getting late, and you need some rest." I knew that he wouldn't discuss the meaning of the tablet because I was there, and the knowledge filled me with bitterness. Bahr, alert as a little owl, was also dissatisfied. "You can't go now. You mustn't leave now," he protested vehemently. His words ended in a coughing fit that shook the fragile little body frighteningly. Rochard stood up, uneasiness reflected in his face. "Spare yourself, my friend." Bahr shook his head, still gasping, and waved an impatient hand. "It's too late for all that now. There's no reserve left in me to call up. The only time I feel good is when I forget this physical coffin." "That coffin is precious when it houses a spirit," Rochard replied. "It deserves your care." "You say that? You've been talking about being liberated from matter, or was that just an abstraction?" "You misunderstood me, Amadeus. To follow the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus, the cornerstone of spiritual life in the millennia, one must have strength and good health. A sick body produces unhealthy imaginings and blocks the organs that transmit spiritual light, with a clog of emotions and strangulating anxiety. He who has a message must keep the vessel for that message pure." "But do I have a message?" Bahr asked scornfully. "And anyway, who wants a message these days?" He paused, then continued thoughtfully. "But maybe we really do. You and I, anyway, are persuaded of the value of these letters. Since we can't have real meat, we make do with imaginary food. We satisfy our appetites for power by studying theories that justify our lives and make us phantom monarchs of dream kingdoms. Our weapons are carved from worthless feathers. We dip them in poison and take shots at those who have this world's power and pleasures." He stopped, sighing. "There is alchemy going on right now in your soul, Amadeus. That acid which is called doubt in human beings is separating your gold from your dross, a very useful acid indeed. There's a great difference, you see, between the two kingdoms you just mentioned. One is the kingdom of death, and the other is the kingdom of life. The flesh, after all, however gorgeously desirable, inevitably decays. It's just a toy of the spirit, or, if you prefer, an exciting experiment in the self-expression of the spirit, just like a picture drawn in sand. The fleshly world is a wonderful and profound expressive device, just like music, sculpture, painting, books and cathedrals. The creative joy of the spirit is in all these things, but they are transient. Rochard wrapped his cloak around him. Keep on fighting, Amadeus. The chosen one must serve with all his capacity, including bitterness and doubts. I have never felt so worthwhile, Bahr said. You have given me transcendent feelings and ideas that might well make me conceited, something no worm of a man has a right to feel. I am going and look in the mirror. Look inside yourself, Rochard replied. The mirror image is just reality's shadow. He was the wizard of 1,000 kings, and I chanced to meet him one night, wandering. He told me tales, and he drank my wine. Me and my magic man kind of feeling fine. He wore a cloak of gold and eyes of fire, and when he spoke I felt this deep desire to free the world from its fear and pain, and help the people to feel free again. Why don't we listen to the voices in our heart? For then I know we'll find we're not that far apart. Everybody's got to be happy, everyone should sing, 'cause I know the joy of life, the peace that love can bring. Thus spoke the wizard in his mountain home. The vision of his wisdom means we'll never be alone, and I will dream on my magic night, and the million silver stars that guide me with their light.